So, there's been a number of stories regarding the FCC lately that may lead me to believe that public pressure might be starting to influence Ajit Pai, because at this point, he's under investigation for corruption by the FCC's Inspector General. He has no political capital because he spent it all repealing net neutrality, so he doesn't have much room to implement drastic regulatory changes at this point because the public is watching and they're largely dissatisfied with what he's been doing. So the first story I want to talk about that kind of leads me to this conclusion is that on July 10th, a story broke about the FCC wanting to charge consumers that had complaints about internet service providers $225 just to hear them out. As Gizmodo's Tom McKay reports, according to The Verge, the FCC is now mulling a plan that could ensure its staff will only review complaints against telecoms after the complainant has paid a $225 fee. So what exactly does this mean? Well, up until this point, if you wanted to file a complaint against a company like Comcast, AT&T, or Verizon, there were two ways you can do this. You could file a formal complaint or an informal complaint. Now, a formal complaint would cost $225, and the article describes it as kind of being like a court proceeding, so they would definitely take action. Or you could just file an informal complaint and the FCC would look into it and they still might take action. However, the FCC proposed a change to informal complaints that would basically make them useless. So if you actually wanted the FCC to review a complaint that you had about a company like Verizon, and more importantly, if you wanted them to take action, you'd effectively be forced to spend $225 in order to file a formal complaint. So they made the informal complaint option basically useless. Now, clearly, this plan was crafted at the behest of internet service providers, because if there's no complaints, then Ajit Pai's repeal of net neutrality would further be legitimized because he could present the lack of complaints as evidence that his repeal wasn't actually harmful to consumers. So he can say, look, we repealed net neutrality X amount of time ago, and we've had no complaints. So it's clearly not having the disastrous impact that proponents of net neutrality claimed it would have. So obviously, it's an outrageous proposition because you're a government agency. We pay your checks with our tax dollars. It's your job to hear our complaints. But instead, the agency has become so rogue, so detached from the American public that in order for them to even take action at all, we'd have to pay them $225 just to do their job. It's ridiculous, but thankfully the backlash was so swift and so severe that the FCC reportedly dropped talks of this plan the very next day. As Wired's Clint Finley reports, the Federal Communications Commission has reportedly dropped a proposed change in how it handles complaints that critics argued could have left consumers with fewer avenues to resolve problems with telecommunications carriers like AT&T and Verizon. One reason the critics saw ill will behind the proposal, the FCC last year declined to release the full text of informal complaints it received about net neutrality ahead of the agency's vote to jettison those rules in December. The Obama-era rules banned broadband providers from blocking or discriminating against particular internet content. The FCC highlighted the lack of formal complaints about net neutrality in support of its decision to roll back the rules, but it did not address the informal complaints. In a statement, Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, the FCC's only Democratic commissioner, called the proposed change to the informal complaint process, quote, bonkers. And bonkers it is. So apparently there is a level of shame we can exert on the FCC that will get them to budge. Now, there was another issue that the FCC surprisingly flipped on recently. According to Harper Neidig of The Hill, Federal Communications Commission Chairman Ajit Pai said Monday that he has serious concerns about the proposed merger between Sinclair Broadcast Group and Tribune Media, a surprising move that could likely kill the controversial $3.9 billion deal. In a statement, Pai questioned the company's plans to get the deal approved by selling selling off some television stations and said he would propose sending the deal to be reviewed by an administrative law judge. The evidence we've received suggests that certain station divestitures that have been proposed to the FCC would allow Sinclair to control those stations in practice, even if not in name, in violation of the law, Pai said. Now, make no mistake about it, this is good news. But what's interesting to me is that just a month prior, we had headlines like this from Gizmodo's AJ Dellinger. FCC reportedly planning to change rules to save Sinclair's takeover of local news before court can kill it. Now, in this article, Dellinger goes into great detail about how the FCC went above and beyond to modify the rules ahead of court hearings in order to strengthen Sinclair's legal case before they petitioned the court to approve their merger with Tribune Media. Now, the FCC's goal was to increase the limits on how many stations a broadcast company can own. So rather than capping media ownership at 39%, the FCC sought to increase that at the behest of Sinclair. But all of a sudden, we have this flip from the FCC, and now they made a move that throws this entire merger into jeopardy, inexplicably so. Came out of nowhere. So the question is, after all this time, after Ajit Pai has been doing the bidding of Sinclair, unapologetically so, why the change of heart? And at face value, it may seem like Ajit Pai is motivated to stop being so brazenly corrupt because he's currently being investigated, as I stated, by the FCC's Inspector General. And this is over accusations that his agency acted to assist Sinclair. But the problem with that explanation is the timeline. Ajit Pai has been under investigation by his own agency since February of this year. So, just this last month, he took action, or wanted to take action, to make regulatory changes that would make the Sinclair Tribune Media merger more likely. So I don't know what's motivating here to do the right thing for once. But I will say that it is possible maybe he found something out about the investigation. Maybe he learned that the FCC's Inspector General was closing in on him and was about to, indict him for something. Maybe it scared him. I don't know. But for whatever reason, the FCC is somewhat starting to cave to public pressure. And that's a good sign because it shows that we're starting to break them. And that's what we want to do. We need to exert a constant amount of pressure on the FCC to let them know that we don't approve of what they've been doing. He repealed net neutrality, regulatory protections that are supported by the overwhelming majority of the American people in both parties. You can't do that and just get away with it. And I think that activists that support freedom on the internet have done a phenomenal job at keeping the pressure on Ajit Pai and his agency. So that's really the only explanation that I have as to why he's doing the right thing for once. But admittedly, it's not a very satisfactory explanation. I think there's something else going on here that we don't know about. And part of me is skeptical. Even though he did something to kill Sinclair, maybe it's to kind of brace us for something he may be doing that's even more fucked up. I don't know. We've seen nothing but the most corrupt and duplicitous leadership possibly ever in this agency. So anytime they do something, even if it's good, I can't help but be skeptical because that skepticism is warranted given the actions of this agency under his leadership. So I don't know. Take it as a win, but be cautiously optimistic because you never know with Ajit Pai.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.